As far as the history of Ukraine goes, they have had a really rich history and also a really hard history in a lot of different ways, especially in more recent years. They have such a rich cultural history with great authors and great musicians and artists, and they have a lot of beautiful art and things like that. They have a really strong tradition in the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. And a lot of people there are, even if they themselves don't necessarily believe in God, they will claim themselves as members of the Orthodox Church just because that's such a huge part of their tradition, part of their national identity. And then in more recent years, after the communist revolution in Russia, which at the time Ukraine was a part of Russia, there were a lot of different things that happened with the economy and things like that were really hard on poor little Ukraine. During World War II, excuse me, there were several battles that were fought in Ukraine. I served in the Crimean Peninsula, which is down in the very southern part, and all over the place you'll see things for people trying to remember what happened during World War II, just because it was such a hard period of time. Even before that, though, they had been going through a rough period with the communists in Russia. When Stalin enforced a famine in Ukraine, he essentially starved the people in the 1930s because they refused to work with his collectivized farms and things like that. So they went straight from that into World War II and having battles fought on their soil. And then after the end of World War II, they were still part of the Soviet Union, and that was really hard for the economy and also just for the people in general. The Orthodox Church was persecuted mercilessly by the communist regime, and a lot of priests were killed and arrested and would just disappear. But something that I noticed because of all that, because of how hard things have been in recent decades, is that the people are very resilient. And also, I was really impressed by how faithful they still were. A lot of people that you meet who grew up during the Soviet era, they'll tell about how their babushki and their little grandmothers would go and sneak Bibles to them, and they would tell them stories from the Gospel of Christ. And it was just impressive to me to think that even though it was so dangerous and even though everything was so hard, people were really trying to keep their faith and to keep that, I don't know, that hope that comes through the gospel. And because of that, that's really the reason that there is still a belief in God in Ukraine. You'd think with all these bad things happening that people would be more tempted to just kind of throw up their hands and say, if there is a God, why does he allow these things to happen? But instead, the people have taken that to be, God got us through this and he's going to get us through the hard times we're in right now. And there's a really deep spiritual strength with the people there. Not with everyone, of course. There are still individuals who kind of maintain the Soviet perspective of atheism. But I'd say the majority of people have some sort of belief in God that has carried through all of the hardships that they've been through. Also because of the Ukrainian people being able to keep some semblance of faith throughout all of that, that made it easier for the church to come into Ukraine in 1990 when they were able, like right after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were able to come and send representatives and dedicate the land of Ukraine for the preaching of the gospel. If people there, if the Ukrainian people had not kept their faith, then I don't think that it would have come about that easily. I don't think that it would have been so quick right after the fall of the Soviet Union that the church would be welcomed into Ukraine. So I think it's not only a tender mercy, but a miracle in general, that throughout all the hardships, people still believed in God and were still willing to find ways to show their belief in him.